Imagine this. In 1980, instead of launching an IPO that paved the way to future success, Nike went out of business. Because they were drowning in debt from a never-ending fight with the federal government and their competitors Brooks and Converse. Nike is forced to pay millions of dollars of extra back tariffs on shoes that they imported years earlier. Nike goes bankrupt and dissolves. Phil Knight quietly returns to being an accountant. Bill Bowerman retires. Michael Jordan signs with Adidas. Tinker Hatfield never becomes a designer, and as a result, the most iconic Nike sneakers are never made. The swoosh disappears. Just Do It never happens. All this may sound like a far-fetched episode of Black Mirror, but it almost happened. And not only that, but it turns out that the rarest and probably the most important sneakers that Nike has ever made don't even have a swoosh on them. Instead, they have a single generic stripe. Welcome to Athletic Interest and the crazy story of how Nike faked its own shoes to save the company. From the start, Phil Knight's vision for Nike was always to dethrone Adidas and become the #1 sports brand in the world. As you can imagine, all of the other brands in the pecking order were not happy to see Nike come out of nowhere and take a bite of their revenue. Brands like Converse or Brooks were founded long before Nike, and many were well established in the athletic footwear market at that time. While Nike was making moves to grow their business, competing US brands tried to find a weakness in Nike's business model. Besides their creative marketing, Nike's core advantage was importing high-quality sports shoes from Asia at a lower price than their competitors who produced in Europe or America. And those competitors, organized under the Rubber Manufacturers Association, tried to turn exactly that strength into a weakness. The brands teamed up to lobby the government's customs departments to use a very old law to stop Nike's momentum. The list of players involved in support of Nike or the rubber manufacturers bears some interesting names. Representing Nike's interest in Congress, among others, was a certain Al Gore. On the side of Nike's competitors was Senator Ted Kennedy. But the two big names are not the only historic thing about this dispute. Its impact was so significant that it threatened Nike to go out of business. Phil Knight still recalls receiving the first letter. I opened it and my hands started to shake. It was a bill for $25 million. The federal government was saying that Nike owed customs duties dating back 3 years by virtue of something called the American selling price, an old duty assessing method. American selling what? The American Selling Price, or ASP, was a protectionist law from the era of the Great Depression. The ASP indicated that a tariff on an import into the United States would be calculated according to the price of a similar American-made good rather than the manufacturer's price. For example, the tariff on a particular good might be 50% of a good's price. If a British company made that good for $20 and an American company for $50, the ASP standard would put the tariff on the British-made good at $25 rather than $10. So what did that mean for Nike? To understand the financial implications, we estimated some calculations based on the information from a Washington Post article by a Nike lawyer. Nike had been paying a 20% import tariff on manufacturing costs of $7.75, so $1.55. But according to the ASP law, Nike had to pay 50% of the price of a Brooks competitor shoe that was made in the US and priced at $17. So instead of paying $1.55, Nike suddenly had to pay $8.50 per pair. That's more than they paid to manufacture the shoes. So Nike had to pay $16.25 total import price per pair instead of $9.30. The difference of $6.95 may not sound like a lot of money, but when you multiply that difference over the millions of sneakers that Nike was importing, it would add up to a gigantic bill and many millions of dollars. 25 million to be exact. To put that into perspective, that was the sales that Nike made in a whole year at that time. As Phil Knight puts it, if we actually did owe $25 million to the government, we were out of business, just like that. So what did they do? The absurd next steps did not only solve all of Nike's problems and set the stage for its success to this day, a byproduct was the creation of the rarest Nike sneakers ever made. Nike simply launched a new shoe brand and called it One Line. It was a knockoff, dirt cheap and with a simple logo, manufactured in the US. They priced it low, just above cost. Now customs officials would have to use this competitor shoe as a new reference point deciding on import duty. The sole purpose of the collection was to produce exact copies of Nike shoes made offshore that could be used by customs to make comparisons, rather than the higher-priced models by Converse or Brooks. The trick was that they had to make it look like a different brand. They even produced a real-looking catalog to make the brand look more credible to customs. Imagine what it must have been like inside of the Nike headquarters the morning that they sent in their one-line shoes to be assessed as their competitor.
Thus was born the One Line, which over a couple years sold a couple thousand pairs and reduced the increase in our duties by 2/3.
It worked. After years of fighting, Nike managed to reduce its duties significantly and finally settled the case. For Nike, given the high stakes involved of either going public or going out of business, it meant everything. Phil Knight later described how this was a fight for the survival of Nike. Every day was life and death. That was the ultimate competition. If we lost, it's very unlikely there's a Nike today, and we knew that. The rest, as they say, is history. As a result of winning this fight, Nike was able to reduce their tariffs, save millions of dollars in their settlement negotiation with the government, set up a lobbying foothold in Washington, D.C., successfully launch their IPO, begin manufacturing in China, and the icing on the cake. Nike was then involved in the legislative process to scrap the law that was standing in their way. Everything that Nike is today was only possible because of this shoe. You have to give Nike's leadership credit for reverse engineering the strategy that was being used against them to turn the problem into the solution. They understood that the law was being manipulated by their competitors and decided to manipulate the same law in the opposite direction. After the ASP fight, Nike was off and running to dethrone Adidas as the #1 sports brand in the world. You could argue that a few of the Rubber Manufacturers Association footwear brands involved are still feeling the ripple effects and haven't been the same since. Some of the brands mentioned in the lawsuit are still around and relevant, while others are barely on the radar. Over time, Converse sank so much that it fell into bankruptcy, changed hands, and was bought by Nike. The outcome of this battle shook up the order in the United States athletic footwear industry. Outside of the impact on the brands and tariff laws, the one-line brand also represents business trends that were going on at the time. As globalization and seeking out lower-cost countries to manufacture products became a standard business practice, the migration of footwear manufacturing away from America and later also Europe sped up. While they only have one simple generic stripe on the side and no swoosh, the one-line brand shoes may be one of the most significant pieces of Nike history. The more we've learned about the one-line story, the more it seems to be a quintessential just-do-it Nike story. The one-line brand played a critical role in Nike's victory in their battle with the customs department and was a game-changer that enabled the brand to survive long enough to become what they are today. By our estimates, it is a small miracle that any of these off-brand unknown Nike sneakers survived 40 years without ending up in the landfill. There are 12 known pairs of Nike Moon shoes in the world, but how many pairs of the one line survived over the years? We'd bet not many. Setting aside the question of rarest ever, they are still probably the most important line of shoes that Nike ever made and stand as historic grail symbols of the Nike hustle. If you enjoy nerding out on sports, business and culture, make sure to subscribe to our channel and check out our newsletter. Once a week, we break down the business behind sports and talk about the biggest deals, stories and general madness of the week.